Hello YouTubers, and welcome to my astrology video, which is called Are Zodiac Signs Reversed in Earth's Southern Hemisphere? Or alternatively titled A Whole Earth Dual Sign or Six Sign Zodiac. And this is a possible solution to the problem of matching astrology's seasonally derived northern hemisphere zodiac signs to countries in the southern hemisphere. So let's start off by just analyzing the problem. The zodiac, as we know it, is a system of dividing up the portion of sky through which the sun, the moon, and planets seem to travel, which is known as the ecliptic. Of course, they don't, because it's just an apparent motion. This system was originally invented in countries in Earth's northern hemisphere, where astronomers named the constellations according to environmental observations linked to the seasons. For example, the constellation that the sun seemed to pass through every year at the beginning of spring was named Aries, the ram, because here the sun breaks up the frozen earth as a ram attacks with its horns. Similarly, in the month of Taurus, oxen work to prepare the ripening of the corn. And both those quotes were from a book called The Origin of the Zodiac by author Rupert Gleedo. I'm also going to be quoting from that book again coming up. So let's just look at the derivation of Earth's seasons. How did we get our seasons? This might be a good time to explain where I got a lot of the images in this video from. A lot of them are from Wikipedia, from their Wikimedia Commons or their Creative Commons, and they are either in the public domain or they're fair use. And I have attributed the authors below the video. You can see a link to the author's Wikimedia page. Other than that, I've got some of my own photos and videos, a couple of time lapses, I think. And I've also downloaded some stock photos, royalty-free stock photos that are available on the internet. And I've also downloaded, with permission, some photographs from other photographers who have explicitly asked for permission. I think that's fair. So looking at this picture of the derivation of the seasons, you've probably all seen something like it before, but it shows how basically we get our seasons because of the tilt of the Earth. The Earth is tilted at 23.5 degrees. So as it revolves around the sun, and they haven't shown the other planets revolving around the sun, just for clarity, I suppose, but as the Earth revolves around the sun, either the northern hemisphere or the southern hemisphere is going to be closest to the sun and get the greatest area or landmass of sunlight. Apart from at the equinoxes, when both hemispheres are illuminated equally. So the problem about using this northern hemisphere derived system in countries of the southern hemisphere is that the Aries to Pisces signs that we know do not fit the seasons, which are of course reversed. The problem becomes accentuated when you try to use the zodiac astrologically, overlaying the original seasonal and agricultural measuring system with occult correspondences. For example, the sign Capricorn in the tropical zodiac starts at the winter solstice around December 21st in the northern hemisphere. And this sign has profound occult and mythological associations with the constriction or limiting of light associated with the sign's Saturn ruler. The sun is said to die in this sign and then be reborn after 3 days at the winter solstice as light from the physical sun increases. This is perhaps why the Christian Church instigated the celebration of Christmas, or the birth of Christ, or light, at the old pagan celebration of the winter solstice. But in the southern hemisphere, December 21st coincides with the height of summer, or the summer solstice, after which the light from the sun decreases, not increases, as in the north. Even though many Australians and South Africans still celebrate Christmas at this time, hopefully we can see how the esoteric association to the seasons is lost. So there are several solutions to this problem which astrologers have come up with. And one of those is by one of last century's great astrologers, Dane Rudyard. So what I've done is I've taken the ideas of Dane Rudyard a bit further and combined them with another idea of having a 6-sign zodiac, and that can also be known as a dual sign, sometimes even a mirror zodiac, to try and solve the problem of the seasonal mismatch. So let's just go over the derivation of the tropical zodiac, all right? And hopefully you can see this diagram again from this is a public domain image from the Wikimedia Commons. So this zodiac, the tropical zodiac, which is the zodiac that most astrologers in Europe and America use when calculating birth charts, horoscopes, was invented by the astronomer Claudius Ptolemy in the 1st century AD. Now, Ptolemy named his 12 signs after the names of 12 of the constellations which lie on or near the ecliptic. They're actually, some say 13, some say maybe a few more, but as we know the signs, they're taken from the 12 that are closest to the ecliptic. And this diagram shows the backdrop of these constellations as we see them from Earth, as we orbit the Sun. So Ptolemy's motivation for inventing this new zodiac instead of using the older zodiac, which was based on the constellations, was to solve a problem known as precession, also known as precession of the equinoxes, or sometimes axial precession. I think that's the term they use in Wikipedia. And this is the gradual movement of the equinoxes westward along the ecliptic relative to the fixed stars. It's caused by the shift in the orientation of Earth's axis of rotation, rather like a wobbling top. And this traces out a cone with a cycle of approximately 26,000 years called the Great or Platonic Year. And we can see from this rather nice GIF animation, we can see that process again. So Ptolemy placed the 12 signs of this new zodiac into a theoretical circle of measurements based on the Earth's equinoxes and solstices. And the word that I want to underline there is theoretical, okay? It's not actually what's real out there, because it doesn't correspond exactly to the constellations as we see them. So in this diagram here, which I've called Figure 1, we can see the apparent path of the Sun as it appears to move northwards at what the Northern Hemisphere calls the spring equinox. It reaches the Tropic of Cancer, which is 23.5 degrees north of the equator. It appears to stand still at the summer solstice, a word which literally means sun still, and then it appears to move southward to cross the equator again at what the Northern Hemisphere calls the autumn equinox. Then on December 22nd, the Sun appears to have reached the Tropic of Capricorn, or 23.5 degrees south, at what the Northern Hemisphere calls the winter solstice. Turn around and head north again. Now, see that on December 22nd, at the station that the Northern Hemisphere calls the winter solstice, it's actually summer in the Southern Hemisphere. So the names of the signs of the zodiac do not fit the seasons as well as they do in the Northern Hemisphere. So let's just look at how the zodiac signs got their names. The idea of dividing the path of the planets through the zodiac into 360 degrees originated independently in Babylon, Egypt, and China, probably based on the length of the year, so that the sky returns to the same point every 365 days. The division of the year into 12 is probably because 12 is a more convenient number than 13 or 14 months, which occurred in countries where the calendar was determined by the moon. And this is another quote from Rupert Gleado's book, The Origin of the Zodiac. All months were originally moon periods, and in Islamic countries, the month still begins with the first appearance of the new crescent moon after sunset. Now, in Rupert Gleado's book, he gives quite an enlightening quote from a 9th century monk by the name of Helpericus, who speculated on the origin of the names of the zodiac signs. And it says, this is what Helpericus says: Aquarius and Pisces are explained by the rainy season, Leo by the heat, and Libra by the equinox. In Cancer, the sun begins to move backwards like a crab. The scorpion's sting and the archer's arrow are both compared to the sting of hail showers, and Capricorn is the lower turning point of the sun because goats graze uphill. The ram, however, was either named because the sun breaks up the frozen earth as a ram attacks it with its horns, and as I quoted earlier, or else because rams, having slept on their left side all the winter, now start to sleep on their right. Now, to continue, he says, in the month of Taurus, oxen work to prepare the ripening of the corn, and the explanation of Gemini is an incoherent allusion to Castor and Pollux. Virgo, finally, is so called because the earth is exhausted and no longer bears any fruit, the transition from the pretty girl to the old maid on the way. End of quote. So we can see how these names intimately fit the seasonal changes in weather and agriculture for the hemisphere where they were invented, which is the Northern Hemisphere. In Ptolemy's treatise on celestial mechanics, called the Tetrabiblos, the astronomer says, quote, the zodiac, being a circle, has no natural beginning, so the sign of the ram, which begins from the vernal equinox, is taken as the beginning of the 12. And, as if the zodiac were a live being, they make it begin with the excessive moisture of spring and make the other seasons follow, because all creatures in their first youth have an excess of moisture. Like the spring, are still delicate and growing. End of quote. And that is from Tetrabiblos 1:10. I'd like to say a few words about how the geography of the earth was known in Ptolemy's time. Now, this is a map. It's known as Ptolemy's world map, and it was reconstituted from Ptolemy's geography around 150 AD in the 15th century. And this is a bit more of an artistic representation of how the world was perceived in Ptolemy's time. The point I want to make here is that at that time, in Ptolemy's time, they did not know about the Southern Hemisphere. In the Southern Hemisphere, where Earth's seasons are opposite to those in the Northern Hemisphere, Ptolemy's reasoning of applying Aries the ram to spring would not apply, because in April, when it is spring in the Northern Hemisphere and the days are getting longer, it is autumn in the Southern Hemisphere and the days are getting shorter. So this problem was ignored for a long time by astrologers, except for in the last century, people began to address it. So one of those astrologers was Dane Rudyard. In his book, Astrological Timing, The Transition to the New Age, which is available for view at the Chaldea Archival Project website, and again, I'll put a link under the video, Rudyard addresses this problem thusly, and quote, "What is the solution of the problem insofar as an astrology based on the tropical seasonal zodiac is concerned? The simplest solution is that Aries becomes Libra in the south hemisphere. Southern hemispheric birth charts should therefore have all their zodiacal signs reversed, so that if a person in Buenos Aires is born in early August, his sun is in Aquarius." End of quote. Okay, so we obviously will then ask, we might ask, how can we reverse the signs of the zodiac? Don't they always stay the same, whichever hemisphere we're in? And yes, that's true. They don't suddenly change their positions when we view them from the southern hemisphere, but they do appear upside down, or if not completely upside down, kind of a bit on their side, depending on where they're viewed from. So hopefully you can see this picture of, this is the constellations, some of these summer constellations. I took this picture in Los Angeles, which is 34 degrees north. And this is known as the summer constellations because we can see them in the evening in the summer. And they're called the teapot on the left, and then you'll probably recognize the center one, which is Scorpius. Astronomers call it Scorpius, not Scorpio. And Libra on the right, Libra the balance. And I've put in I've connected the dots here with white lines for clarity. Now, if we compare these pictures to pictures taken from the southern hemisphere, we can see that the constellation of Scorpius can be seen facing the other way. So you might say, well, does that really make any difference? Probably not, it still looks like a scorpion. And if we look at the other constellations like the bull or Leo, the lion, they might be facing the other way, but they still look like a bull or a lion. There are a couple of constellations, however, where the constellations do not look the same, such as Libra, because, Libra, the balance, justice, a balance has its pans pointing downwards. You've got the central, what's it called, fulcrum, and then the balance hanging down with gravity. But as viewed from the southern hemisphere, the pans seem to be floating upwards in the sky. So logically, we have to think, it's not really a balance, is it? And people in the southern hemisphere, if they were trying to connect the dots in the constellations to coincide with their agriculture, I don't think they would have called that constellation Libra. Again, I'm talking about constellations here, not signs. And 3,000 years ago, the signs and the constellations were the same. They're not now, as I alluded to before. But when we're thinking about how ancient astronomers would have looked up at the sky and maybe trying to find some relationship to agriculture, I don't think they would have called that particular constellation anything to do with the balance. Also, because it would have been rising or apparently behind the sun in their spring, and spring is not when they would be weighing the harvest in a balance. By the way, these pictures of Scorpius and Libra in the southern hemisphere, they are from a website by a photographer who lives in New Zealand. His name is Christopher Picking. Another constellation which does not look the same from the south as it does from the north is Aquarius. We can see from this photograph by a photographer by the name of Till Credner, this is the constellation, and we can vaguely make out the water bearer. And next we have a slide of an artistic depiction of this constellation. I think it's from the 16th century. And we can see the man. Some depictions show a woman pouring a jug of water